Okay, guys, let's get into this MK Ultra discussion here, or at least begin it. Obviously I'll carry this into several shows. It's 20 pages long. MK Ultra was the code name, is, I should say, is, as far as what we could still call it today. They don't call it that anymore because they want us to think that it's defunct. It's not. But we'll use the term was because the name is no longer in use. I don't even know what they call it today, but we'll still call it, we can still call it MK Ultra because that's what it is. It's still the mind control program, guys. It's very much in use. In fact, several CIA agents over the years, since the time it supposedly was defunct in the mid-70s, have admitted that it's still in use. And you can see that it's still in use. Just look at Hollywood. Anyway, the MK Ultra program was the code name for a CIA mind control research program that began in the early 1950s. There is much published evidence that the project involved the use of many types of drugs and other mechanisms to manipulate people's mental states and to alter brain function. Absolutely sick, psychopathic crap. Right out of the freaking Dark Ages, guys. Well, when you realize who brought us the Dark Ages, and you see the not-so-hidden hand of this same group of people behind the CIA's MK Ultra program, well, that shouldn't come as any shock now, should it? Elite Jew pigs, guys. They're just resurrecting, just like the torture fiasco brought to us by the neocon Jew pigs. Torture was very big in the Dark Ages, too, wasn't it? It's their same old crap, guys, coming back again. The same people pushing the same crap. What a surprise. Anyway, the project's intentionally oblique CIA cryptonym, MK Ultra, is made up of the digraph MK, meaning that the project was sponsored by the agency's Technical Service Division, and it might even actually refer a tongue-in-cheek fashion to, mind control, M and K, kind of having a Soviet overtone to it, K for control. In any case, we're supposed to believe that the ultra part of the title is arbitrary, that there's no real meaning to it. That's a bunch of BS too. They wanted to take mind control to the ultimate ultra level with no inhibitions. And that's really what they were told to do, to have no restraints, nothing holding you back, no moral barriers, break all barriers. You're given a free license to explore any possibility. That's really the meaning of MK Ultra. Mind control without any barriers. Anyway, Project MK Ultra was first brought to wide public attention by the U.S. Congress in the form of the Church Committee. Senator Frank Church brought a lot of things out. I'm sure a lot of stuff was hidden as well. But the stuff that was brought out is jaw-dropping enough. And then there was the presidential commission known as the Rockefeller Commission that brought some more up. But, of course, that unquestionably was a cover-up job. But nevertheless, even some interesting things came out of that. Although the CIA insists, once again, that MK-Ultra-type experiments have been abandoned, 14-year CIA veteran Victor Marchetti, for example, has stated in various interviews that the CIA routinely conducts disinformation campaigns, of course, so naturally, can't believe anything the Fitch agency says when they say that they're finished with a program. You pretty much got to believe the opposite of what they say. But he also admitted that the CIA mind control research is still ongoing. He admitted it. All right, guys, short break. Be right back. In a 1977 interview, Marchetti specifically called the CIA claim that MKUltra was abandoned a, quote, cover story. On the Senate floor in 1977, of course they're not going to stop it, guys. When you got a good thing going, when you reach, a certain low of corruption, you're not going to bounce back again unless you're made to do so by force. And that's never happened. So you think they're just going to stop this? They're not only not going to stop it, they're going to take it to new lows. They're going to continue to use what they had developed, to that point, and covertly continue to experiment to take it to new lows. Of course. And let me tell you, one of the main purposes for the CIA's MKUltra program was not just to create the Manchurian candidate, not just to create assassins, but to manipulate the public. Which, of course, tied right in with their, Operation Mockingbird. I'll do a whole show on that sometime. Which focused and still focuses on manipulation of the media. Elite two pigs, of course, control the media, but they've used intelligence agencies like the CIA to experiment scientifically and come up with new ways to make their propaganda more effective. But, like I said, I'll save that for another show. On the Senate floor in 1977, Senator Ted Kennedy made this statement regarding MKUltra. Of course, Mr. Kennedy, unlike his two brothers, was a big shill artist. You can bet they dragged him into a back room and gave him an ultimatum. You either make sure you see to it that you don't go down the same road your brothers did. In fact, you make sure that you kiss our ass and, we'll let you live and make sure you live a comfortable life. Or, one of the ways they did that, guys, was by setting him up with the Chappaquiddick incident. I'll have a show coming up on that. That's interesting. They totally set him up. Totally set him up, as I'll demonstrate when we do that show. That helped to ensure. And then, of course, over the years, I'm sure they made threats to family members, and he knew they'd carry him out because several Kennedys were killed even after JFK and RFK. Not his immediate family, but, extended family members. And so he knew they weren't kidding around. But anyway, the ultimate, though, what really shut him up right from the beginning was the Chappaquiddick incident. Anyway, let me get into this quote here. The deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. At least one death, that of Dr. Olson, resulted from these activities. The agency itself acknowledged that these tests made little scientific sense. Yeah, right. Again, they want you to think that, oh yeah, okay, we were bad. We shouldn't have done it. It was kind of a waste of time. Anyway, nothing came out of it. Right. Anyway, the quote finishes here. The agents doing the monitoring were not qualified scientific observers. Now, that's complete BS, guys. Absolute BS. The participants in these experiments were absolute experts in their various fields, both in and out of government, being drawn, again, as he just said, from hospitals, universities, and government facilities all around the country. Interesting that he would say they weren't experts, they didn't know, what they were doing, essentially. Yet he said 30 universities and institutions were involved. Can you friggin' believe this? Involved in extensive testing and experimentations. How in the hell could he possibly say that they weren't qualified scientific observers? Well, I guess he said the agents were. The CIA agents. What the hell does that matter? What does it matter if the agents doing the monitoring weren't qualified scientific observers? That doesn't make a damn bit of difference when the scientists who were doing the experiments were. You see how they try to gloss over, whitewash everything? He was probably hoping with that last statement that you wouldn't catch the claim that it was the agents he was referring to and not the experimenters. But anybody with half a brain that paid attention to what he was saying can clearly see he's trying to twist things and minimize it's damage control. Once again, guys, the fact that he mentioned 30 universities and institutions, that they were involved in this, can you frickin' believe it? People were going in, and Clinton admitted back in, 1996, that there was major government experimentation going on involving the use of radiation, radioactive substances. People were going into major hospitals, for burn treatments, for example, and unbeknownst to them, while they were getting their burns treated, they were having radioactive substances applied to them. And they would come back in for follow-up checkups, and, they'd change the bandage, the dressing on their burns or whatever. But they were also testing them to see, what effects the radiation was having. They didn't even know. The psychopathic bastard doctors and scientists that people were trusting, because they had their PhDs, all their plaques up on their walls, were using them as guinea pigs. Oh, yes, you can trust the men in the white coats, can't you? You can trust government officials. Officialdom across the board. You can trust it, can't you? You see, guys, what a monkey-rigged system you got here. This was the case decades ago. How much more so do you need to be on alert today? Because once again, the law of entropy. Corruption doesn't go away. It gets friggin' worse unless people stand up and put a stop to it. And those people are you and I. They're not the officials in government. They're the ones orchestrating the damn corruption on behalf of their elite Jew pig masters. Anyway, there had been a number of earlier secret U.S. governmental projects to study mind control preceding MK Ultra. They also studied interrogation, behavior modification, and related topics. These earlier projects included Project Chatter, established in 1947, and Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, both established in 1951. Headed by the Jew, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Oh, yes, he was a Jew, all right. Anyway, pick up there, guys, when we get back. A lot of Jew names pop up in this thing. We'll be right back, folks. As I was saying before the break, headed by the Jew, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, that psychopathic child-molesting bastard. Molesting isn't even a strong enough word, guys. He tortured young children as part of the MK Ultra mind control program. We'll talk about that later. I'll be reading some depositions from victims of this son of a bitch. Anyway, headed by the Jew, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, MK Ultra was started on the order of CIA Director Allen Dulles, another psychopathic piece of inhuman crap, on April 13th, 1953, largely in response to alleged Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques on U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. Yeah, right. They always got their little cover story. The CIA said that it wanted to be able to use similar methods on its own captives. Unbelievable. That's interesting, isn't it? Because the justification for torture couldn't make that claim because all other nations banned the damn thing. We even banned it years ago, and now they resurrected it. They couldn't say, oh, well, we got to do it because they're using it on us. Oh, no, no. Just that, oh, well, it'll help us get information. It's already been decided, for good reason, that torture doesn't accomplish anything. It's not good for getting information. In fact, very often you get false information because under duress, people will say anything just to stop the torture. They'll make damn stuff up. Or, in this case, with the CIA's use of it, they'll admit to anything they're told to say, because that's exactly what they've done from day one, guys. A really good British documentary came out a few years ago. I forget the name of it now. Brought that out, though. It talked about how they were taking prisoners over into, Eastern Europe. Then they were channeling them down into Morocco, where there's no legislation down there against torture. And, they would hand them a script sheet to read off of as they recorded them. After torturing them for, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, to a month, whatever it took until they realized, okay, they're breaking. Now it's time. Bring in the confession sheet. They'd put cigarettes out on their testicles and whatnot. British documentary. I wish I could remember the name of it. Now, somebody knows the one I'm referring to. It dealt with the CIA-run prisons and the torturing and the fake confessions. Let me know, because I lost touch of that documentary a couple of years back. It was really good. It covered this very well. Anyway, but it's interesting. The CIA, came up with this excuse. Well, they're using these tactics, and there's no evidence of that to begin with. They just made the story up. But when you compare that with what they're using, the dismal, lame, limp excuse, that they've been using for torture, it just shows how dumbed down people have gotten. Anyway, the agency was also interested in being able to manipulate foreign leaders with such techniques, mind control techniques. And later, of course, invented several schemes to drug Fidel Castro, none of which really resulted in anything, but they had all kinds of plans to kill him, too, exploding cigars and smearing poison on his coffee mug and all kinds of ridiculous. Anyway, and looking back, guys, I gotta wonder if there was even any truth to that. I don't think there was. The whole Cold War was a fraud. Mr. Castro, as I'll demonstrate on a future show, was an elite Jew pig bastard. Is a frickin' Marrano Jew. So were they really out to get him? They loved communism, ladies and gentlemen. They created communism. He was one of their whores. So you think they're going to use their minions in the CIA to take out one of their... Why do you think he remains in power? Isn't that interesting? They went after so many alleged dictators around the world and took them out during the Cold War, claiming they were communists and collaborating with the Soviets. None of them were. And yet the one guy who really was in bed with the Soviets, a total hardcore communist, they never managed to take him out, did they? Man, have we been suckered or what? No, I don't think any of those plots to kill Castro had any truth to them. It was all a big frickin' ploy. But you don't want to miss that show. I don't know when I'll get to it. There's so many damn topics to cover. But that's very interesting. Castro the Jew. I'll be covering that at some point. Anyway, MK Ultra experiments were often conducted without the subject's knowledge or consent, most of the time, in fact. I don't know any exception to that rule. I don't know any time when they were made aware. Oh, actually, yeah, they were. They did some things on various campuses, like Harvard, for example. Yeah, there were some people who volunteered to take LSD and whatnot. In fact, one of them was Kaczynski. You know, the Unabomber. Do a show on him sometime. He was one of the volunteers. But most of the time, guys, these people were not willful participants. In fact, a good many of them were frickin' children. In 1964, the project was renamed MK Search. This project attempted to produce a perfect truth drug for use in interrogating suspected Soviet spies, supposedly, during the Cold War, and generally to explore any other possibilities of mind control. Gottlieb approved of an MKUltra sub-project to be experimented on with LSD in a June 9, 1953 letter. A good deal of the letter was blacked out, of course, but it's clear that a major U.S. hospital took part in the project. The CIA, in fact, played a major role in the development of LSD, as it turns out. In the February 1978 issue of High Times, psychopathic psychiatrist Timothy Leary was quoted as saying, "If you look back, many things that we thought were accidents turned out were not accidents. The entire LSD movement itself was sponsored originally by the CIA, to whom I give great credit." Yeah, I'm sure you do. You work for him, you sleazeball. "I would not be here today if it had not been for the foresight and prestige of the CIA psychologists. So give the CIA credit for being so truly an intelligence agency." Nothing intelligent about that. Anyway, when asked if he had worked for the agency in this interview, he refused to answer. So it's quite obvious, guys. Yeah, he did work for the company. I'll have more to say on that on future shows. He did drop other very clear hints, and of course there's other evidences too to show that he worked for the agency. His policy of turn on, tune in, and drop out was undoubtedly a CIA-orchestrated mind control tactic. He turned many young people onto drugs. This was the heat of the Vietnam era, of course. So they wanted kids turned on to drugs, and if they weren't turned on to them before they went over, they certainly were once they got there. This helped to numb them up to the reality of the horrors of this friggin' disgusting Jew pig-created war. Anyway, the agency poured multiplied millions of dollars, your tax dollars, of course, into studies probing literally dozens of methods of influencing and controlling the mind. One 1955 MKUltra document provides us with a clear indication of the size and range of the effort of this program. This document referred to the study of an assortment of mind-altering substances described as follows, and this is a quote right from the document. Number one, substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. Isn't that interesting, guys? To make them so disoriented that they'll talk gibberish. I wonder if George W. took some of these drugs. Anyway, number two, substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. So, enhancements of the mind in some instances, for CIA operatives, for example. All right, guys, short break, be right back. All right, continuing reading this document here. Point number three in the document talks about materials which will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Sounds like something from, the old Get Smart show, where, Don Adams, the Get Smart character, would take this pill and then drink a bunch of alcohol and fake that he was drunk. So he could collect intelligence. They would think he was too drunk to understand or remember, what was going on. Take this pill and it would absorb the alcohol. Interesting. They obviously got that idea in the show for something the CIA actually had been working on. Anyway, number four, materials which will promote the intoxicating effect which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. That makes me think back of my teen days and some of the experimenting I used to do. We took a pill called tea. I don't know what the scientific name for it was, but that's what we called it anyway. The street name was tea. And you took one of those, and you got the effect of being drunk. It's like you just downed a pint of whiskey or something. I'm sure that grew out of this friggin' program. Anyway, number 5, materials which will produce the signs and symptoms of recognized diseases in a reversible way so that they may be used for malingering. Anyway, so a pill to give the appearance as though someone's got some deadly disease, but in a way that could be later reversed for whatever reason. Just as a cover, this person is deathly ill, whatever. As part of their, when they were going undercover or something, apparently. Number 6, or maybe to fool somebody into thinking, oh, hey, you've got some serious illness, we need to have surgery. More than likely, that's probably what the hell it was for. You've got this terrible disease. You got to have surgery immediately, brain surgery. And then they would put a friggin' electrode in the person's brain or something and then manipulate them remotely that way. Who knows, guys? All kinds of sinister applications for stuff like this, I'm sure. Use your imagination, and it's probably 10 times worse than that. Number 6, materials which will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness. Jeez, I can't read this morning. Number 7, substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. So-called brainwashing. Yeah, they know about that all too well, don't they? Anyway, but they wanted to be able to give their agents stuff so that under duress, they could withstand it, be numb to it, and not cave in and, divulge information. Of course, anyone who was a victim of MK Ultra, they couldn't get that information out of you anyway if the information was programmed into your brain when you were in one of your alternate personalities and they didn't know the code word to snap you into that personality. Torturing you would never bring that out. Anyway, number 8, materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. Again, I don't know why they focused on that. You don't need drugs to do that. I guess they wanted to be able to produce the same effects without having to induce, multiple personality syndrome, because that's time consuming. It varies from person to person, but it's a lot of work, effort, and time. So I guess they wanted to cut out the time of that just by giving someone a drug that would have the same effect, apparently. Anyway, number 9, physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use. Anyway. So this didn't involve a drug. This was just, shock treatments or trauma-based mind control. They did a lot of that. They'd simply just beat the living crap out of you. They did it with kids, guys. They would abuse them physically and psychologically. The shows I've been doing talking about Satanism. And I really haven't even gotten into the topic of Satanism yet, but, I've touched on a few issues. They'd sacrifice an animal in front of a kid and then later get them to participate in an actual animal sacrifice. And then in time, they've had them, partake in killing of other kids. First show them films, snuff films, and then have them actually participate in the killing of other kids to break them, to so traumatize them psychologically that they break them, induce multiple personality syndrome, and then they could utilize that state of mind to their advantage. Absolute sick bastards. Number 10, substances which produce physical disablement, such as paralysis of the legs, acute anemia, etc. Number 11, substances which will produce pure euphoria with no subsequent letdown. So, again, that was probably, they did that having, in mind the idea of using this, on the soldiers in Nam, to create pure euphoria while they're getting screwed over, lied into the phony-ass war and having their limbs blown off and watching their friends get killed right in front of them, and yet have a state of euphoria. That's exactly what Bertrand Russell said, isn't it? To create a situation where people will have their rights taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because of the effects of the pharmacological products, he said. He talked about this very thing, using pharmacology to induce a state of artificial euphoria. So here you go. The CIA was hot on the trail. Number 12, substances which alter personality structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. So they wanted to produce dependency, destroy independence. Well, haven't they done that? And guys, how much you want to bet? A lot of the additives they put in your damn food are probably drugs that the CIA developed, and they'll call it an emulsifier or something, or they'll mix it in with emulsifying agents so that you'll never know you're actually taking drugs like this developed by the CIA. I mean, come on, look how apathetic society is. How the hell do you think it got this way? I've often joked with friends, what is it with people? They all have the same apathetic attitude. Nobody cares. They got that shoulder-shrugging disposition across the board. I said it's like they all went to the same training school to learn how to become, idiotic asses. How can this be that everybody simultaneously doesn't seem to give a frog's fat ass about what the hell is going on? Guys, it's got to be, stuff you're taking in the drinking water, in the food you eat, probably the air you breathe with the damn chemtrails. Oh, you can bet. Part of the pussification of society. Thank your elite Jew pig bastards for that, guys. They were doing this back in the Dark Ages, poisoning Gentile wells, even before that. Don't think for 1 minute that this stuff is new. They've only developed it further, perfected it more. But they were doing this stuff centuries, millennia ago. In the Dark Ages, guys, most physicians, most or perhaps all, were frickin' Jews. You don't think they were utilizing all of their studies and research into developing things like this? All right, guys, we're going to have to pick up with this tomorrow. I'll get a guest coming on second hour in a few minutes. All right, everybody, welcome back. Going to be picking up today with the MK Ultra discussion. Boy, Shows how much I'm not with it this morning. I didn't even have the file open yet. All right, there we go. I was going through a list, actually a quote from an old CIA document that cites a list of various substances and techniques that were being used, were/are being used for mind control purposes. So I'll pick up from there. Number 13, a material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. Fabrication. In other words, they won't be able to put their thoughts together, I guess. Interesting. Gee, I wonder if they gave something like that to Jackie Onassis Kennedy there when they were questioning her before the rigged. Well, of course, they didn't need to give her anything because the rigged commission didn't really do much probing anyway. But she was so spacey when she gave her answers. You know, maybe they gave her a drug like that to make sure that she was so ditzy, you know, to make sure that she didn't slip anything. Like Bush. They probably gave Bush something similar. They couldn't trust him, you know, to be a good cover-up artist because he was so friggin' stupid. He'd trip over his own tongue. Dumsfeld, too, for that matter. How many slip-ups did that guy make? You know, talking about the missile hitting the Pentagon and Flight 93 being shot down, you know. Or, again, is it on purpose? They just throw that out there because they love to, you know, smear it in your face. Who knows? Anyway, number 14, substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. They had all kinds of applications in mind with this stuff, guys. Number 15, substances which will promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing facilities, preferably without permanent effects. Number 16, a knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., which will be safe to use, provide a maximum of amnesia, and be suitable for use by agent types on an ad hoc basis. And then finally, number 17, a material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and which, in very small amounts, will make it impossible for a man to perform any physical activity whatsoever. Hey, maybe that's what they give all our politicians. All right, guys, short break, right back. CIA documents suggest that chemical, biological, and radiological means were investigated for the purpose of mind control as part of the MKUltra program. So, you know, that admission Clinton made about radiation experiments certainly were connected with MKUltra. Perhaps the whole thing was MKUltra. Not sure how that worked, but somehow radiation, you know, they were exploring the effects of radiation on the mind, not just the body in general and the skin, but pretty twisted stuff, guys. Early efforts focused on LSD as well, which later came to dominate many of MKUltra's programs. Experiments included administering LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other government agents, prostitutes, mentally ill patients, and members of the general public in order to study their reactions. A lot of times the people, again, they didn't even know, guys. LSD, along with other drugs, were usually administered without the subject's knowledge, again, or consent. A violation of the Nuremberg Code that the U.S. agreed to follow after World War II. Well, again, that's all window dressing. They do that so that you think everything is being done above board, just to give you false assurance while they're doing the very opposite. It's always how it works. Efforts to recruit subjects were often illegal, of course. Even discounting the fact that drugs were being administered, though actual use of LSD, for example, was legal in the United States at the time, up until 1967. But nevertheless, it was still a violation of persons' rights to be slipping them drugs without their knowledge or consent. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up several brothels to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the events. They set them up, caught them on film, and if they ever complained about having been used as guinea pigs, well, they'd expose their visitations at the brothels to their wives, or threaten to anyway. Unbelievable, guys. What a bunch of sleazy, rotten bastards. Nothing good. Nothing good has ever come out of, well, not just the CIA, but any of the alphabet federal agencies, take your pick. Nothing. Anyway, the men were dosed with LSD, and the brothels, again, were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study as part of, the MK Ultra program to see how they reacted in that kind of environment under, the influence of the drug, and also to use as bribery material. Anyway, some subjects' participation was consensual, and in many of these cases, the subjects appeared to be singled out for even more extreme experiments, depending on how they reacted. Oh, this would be a good candidate for this other experiment. Let's try it, let's use them for that. Again, guys, like rats in a lab. In one case, volunteers were given LSD for 77 days straight. Can you friggin' believe that? Obviously, permanent brain damage resulted from that, guys. They don't give a damn. LSD was eventually dismissed by MK Ultra's researchers as too unpredictable in its effects. Yeah, no kidding. Although useful information was sometimes obtained through questioning subjects on LSD, not uncommonly, the most marked effect would be the subject's absolute and utter certainty that they were able to withstand any form of interrogation attempt under physical torture. That's one of the things that they liked about it. Another technique investigated was connecting a barbiturate, an IV into one arm and an amphetamine IV into the other. Imagine that, guys. Pump them up. Doesn't matter, how many people must have died during these experiments? We'll never know. Most of the documents have been either blacked out or destroyed completely. It's anyone's guess, but I'd be willing to bet it was in the hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Don't forget, a lot of these people that they selected were mentally, handicapped or insane. They got them from, asylums. A lot of them were gotten from prisons. And again, a lot of them were kids taken from, orphanages, had no parental, guardians that could, that would know that they were missing. Sickening. And again, guys, a lot of them were recruited through, Satanist groups. We talked about that with the Franklin cover-up. The barbiturates were released into the subject first, and as soon as the subject began to fall asleep, the amphetamines were then released to keep them awake. Imagine the abuse on the system, guys. Let's knock them out, wake them up. Knock them out, wake them up. See what kind of effect that has. If they die, oh, well, next. But let's see what kind of effect that can have on the brain. How we can use that to control them. Unbelievable. Just like you would do with, cars and crash dummies. Smash this car into the wall. Let's see what happens. Treating people, human beings that way. I'm telling you, man, it's frickin' unbelievable. How this bitch organization was not shut down when the meager revelations came to light. And when I say meager, they're pretty shocking. But meager in comparison to what's been hidden. We don't even know half of it, what was done. But how that bitch enterprise wasn't shut down, known as the CIA, just on that basis alone, guys, is beyond me. Short break, we'll be right back. So once again, guys, according to the CIA's own documents, they would alternate, once again, giving them barbiturates and then amphetamines. The subject would begin babbling incoherently at this point, and it was sometimes possible to ask questions and get useful answers. Can you imagine these sick psychopathic bastards? These were PhD-endowed scientists and doctors doing this stuff. Imagine the sick bastard sitting there and watching the patient. Oh, this is very interesting. Oh, look, he's drooling now. Oh, let's write this all down here now. Oh, look, he's violently going into convulsions. Oh, well, maybe I will give him some more amphetamines to calm him down. Oh, look, this one is falling asleep. Yeah, we'll give this subject some more barbiturates. You sick bastards. It's just jaw-dropping. It's beyond belief, guys. But again, it'd be bad enough if this was something in the past. Okay, it's over and done with. No. Oh, shit, no. Hell no. Oh, they're still doing it today, guys, on a grander scale. Hell, they're doing it with the entire general public. With the crap they're putting in your food. And, I'm sure a lot of the additives, guys, today are designed around what was learned and continues to be learned from such experiments. Anyway, other experiments involved heroin, mescaline, psilocybin, not even sure what that is, scopolamine, marijuana, alcohol, and sodium pentothal. They probably mixed the whole lot together. Drink up. Or just shot them up, or whatever. Let's see what happens. We'll mix this with that, and unfrickin' believable. One researcher for Project Artichoke made this admission about his method of radiating certain parts of the brain, such as the amygdaloid nucleus. Listen to what he said. At present, this brain center can be specifically stimulated by a current passed through wires inserted through the brain by operation. Such a procedure is obviously useless to this project, but ultrasonics or other means of radiant energy may yet be improved or modified so that a crossfire, as with X-rays, arrangement can be focused on a selected small region in the brain without affecting the surrounding areas. Temporary inhibition of this region, possibly of others, should tame humans. Tame them. Well, when you look at how they performed lobotomies on such a grand scale up into the early 50s. This isn't so shocking now, is it? They would insert an ice pick underneath the eye socket and just jam it back and forth. Totally screw up the frontal lobes. Wow, man, it's unbelievable. Creating a Manchurian candidate-style subject was undoubtedly a goal of MKUltra and related CIA projects. Anybody familiar with MKUltra is, you can't read too far into this without encountering information about that. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. And it's believed that most CIA documents regarding the project were indeed destroyed, making a full investigation of the project all but impossible. But again, that's just about what was going on back then. Nowadays, guys, they probably don't even keep documents or documents that you'll ever see anyway. But anyway, so, there you have it. Destroyed all the paper trail. Some stuff was obtained by, the church committee. Some stuff was released, but again, most of that was blacked out. But all the real hardcore data, the research data, everything was destroyed. Can you imagine what we know about it, guys? It is shocking, but it's nothing. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Again, we'll never know. In the Clinton admission back in, 1996, 97, there was several lawsuits filed, and they won multi-million-dollar lawsuits to some of the victims. Clinton admitted that at least 100,000 Americans were experimented on just with radiation. That's just one aspect of this whole thing. 100,000. So, if that's just the radiation, can you imagine all the other victims? Undoubtedly, it was in the millions. This was done all over the country, major hospitals, major universities. They probably had a whole assembly line going at each facility, probably dozens, hundreds at a time, who knows? It's unfrickin' believable. And they were told, no holds barred, take it to any limit you want, you're given a free license, just like Kinsey, free license, molest the kids, abuse them, whatever. Doesn't matter. In fact, fake the data in that case, the Kinsey case. Fake the data. So you have your desired outcome of demoralizing people. And once again, guys, at the top of the pinnacle of the whole damn thing was Elite U pigs. Both in MKUltra and, of course, the Kinsey BS. Elite U pigs every time. They run the program. They initiate the program. The MKUltra director, Alan Dulles, was originally granted 6% of the CIA operating budget for MKUltra experiments in 1953 without oversight or accounting. They just gave him the money. Here, do with it as you will. But there was undoubtedly other funding provided by the CIA's black budget. As much as they got from Congress, there was also this black budget. A lot of that money comes from, at least today anyway, and going back, to the Iran-Contra days, we know that major CIA funding came through drug dealing. And I'm sure back to this period as well. In fact, this was the heart of the Vietnam War era. We know major drug dealing was going on then, guys. That was stuffing the cadavers with opium and cocaine coming back from China and other parts of the Orient. So, that was funding a lot of this stuff. A lot of the money made from the street sales of these drugs was funding black ops like MK Ultra, even though they were given funding by Congress, it wasn't anywhere near enough to cover this grand scale project. So yeah, a lot of it came from things like this. All right, guys, short break. Be right back. So let's take a look at the Canadian experiments that were involved with this. The experiments were even exported to Canada when the CIA recruited Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, another elite Jew scumball. He was the creator of the psychic driving concept, which the CIA found particularly interesting. Cameron described his theory on correcting schizophrenia, which consisted of erasing existing memories and rebuilding the psyche completely from scratch. In other words, like erasing a computer hard drive. The way he did that, of course, was absolutely sinister. He commuted to Montreal every week to work at the Allen Memorial Institute and was paid $69,000 from 1957 to 1964 to carry out MKUltra experiments there. The CIA appears to have given him the potentially deadly experiments to carry out, since they would be used on non-U.S. citizens. So that way there they could say that, well, it wasn't done here, it wasn't done against Americans. So apparently he was slated to conduct probably the most sinister of all. His stuff was pretty sick. So, that way there, it's kind of like, torturing at Guantanamo. Well, it's not on U.S. soil or in, Morocco. It's still the U.S. doing it, under the auspice of the CIA and other sleazy clandestine agencies. But, it's not done on U.S. soil. Of course, they've been inching their way into getting acceptance for it being done here as well. Torturing prisoners and whatnot. But anyway, in addition to LSD, Cameron also experimented with various paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock, at 30 to 40 times the normal power. Yeah, let's up the ante on this one, baby. Turn up the juice. Oh, we fried that one. Oh, okay, well, we'll come down a little bit. Push it to the edge. How much can we give them without killing them and yet maximize the frying of their brains? His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into a drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements, literally programming them. His experiments were typically carried out on patients who had entered the institute for minor problems such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanently from his actions. Imagine, guys, you go to a head fix doctor. Oh, and he fixes your head all right. You're going there thinking you're getting treatments for, some psychosis or just depression, whatever. And you're being used as a guinea pig, being physically and chemically abused. Unbelievable. His treatments resulted in victims' incontinence, amnesia, including forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking that their interrogators were their parents. Or the ones, experimenting on them. That's how messed up their minds were getting from this crap. It was during this era that Cameron became known worldwide as the first chairman of the World Psychiatric Association, as well as president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations. Can you believe that, guys? All the while he was doing this, he was honored with that prestigious title. So if the top psychiatrist in Canada and America was in fact a psychopath himself, where does that leave the rest of the profession? Cameron had also been a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal only a decade earlier. Isn't that interesting? And what better person to have filled that position but a Jew? Anyway, in December of 1974, the New York Times reported that the CIA had conducted illegal domestic activities, including experiments on U.S. citizens, during the 1960s. This is when the whole lid first got blown off of MKUltra. That report prompted investigations by both U.S. Congress, again in the form of the Church Committee, and a presidential commission, again the Rockefeller Commission, into the domestic activities of the CIA, the FBI, and intelligence-related agencies of the military, all of which were involved in this kind of stuff. It was revealed, for example, that Frank Olson, a United States Army biochemist and biological weapons researcher, was given LSD without his knowledge or consent in 1953 as part of a CIA experiment, and mysteriously committed suicide a week later following a severe psychiatric episode. Well, we know how that works, don't we? Suicide. They pushed him out a window, folks. A CIA doctor assigned to monitor Olson's recovery claimed to be asleep in another bed in a New York City hotel room when Olson jumped through the window to fall 10 stories to his death. Well, that's easy to cover up, isn't it, when you have your buddies at the FBI coming in and investigating? Olson's son disputes this version of events. I'll have a whole show, actually, coming up just on his story. Very interesting. But anyway, his son disputed the official version of events and maintains that his father was, he was murdered due to his knowledge of the often lethal interrogation techniques employed by the CIA in Europe, used on Cold War prisoners. And look what they're doing today, guys. Under the color of law this time. Before they had to lie and cover it up. They've been torturing from friggin' day one. But, they always had to lie about it and cover it up. Now, they come right out in your face and tell you, oh, yeah, we're torturing. But it's good because we're dealing with a formidable enemy here. Frank Olson's body was exhumed in 1994, and cranial injuries indicated Olson had been kicked, knocked unconscious, slugged over the head. And he had other bruises that didn't appear to have resulted from his fall, but nevertheless, he was knocked unconscious before exiting the window. So he did not jump out the window. Like I said, I'll do a whole show on that sometime. The CIA's own internal investigation, by contrast, claimed that Gottlieb, you pig bastard, had conducted the experiment with Olson's prior knowledge, although neither Olson nor the other men taking part in the experiment were informed of the exact nature of the drug until some 20 minutes after its ingestion, when it was too late. Imagine that, guys. Shoot them up first and then tell them later, or drop something in their drink and then tell them later. By the way, I never did LSD per se, but I did try blotter acid once, and only once. And I'll tell you guys, it's freaking unbelievable. Apparently, LSD is even more potent than that, but It's friggin' unbelievable. You are absolutely in no control of your faculties whatsoever. You can't even control what you're thinking. Your mind runs off uncontrollably. Your perception of reality is so twisted, so distorted. And they were giving these people this stuff on a much grander scale than what I took it. Some people 77 days straight, along with other chemicals and, electroshock therapy. What a bunch of sick bastards. We'll be right back, folks. Stick with us. All right, guys, welcome back. The report of the CIA's own, quote, investigation further suggested that Gottlieb was due a reprimand as he had failed to take into account suicidal tendencies, over the Olson incident. That Olson had been diagnosed with suffering from, which might well have been exacerbated by the LSD. But again, guys, this whole thing's a fraud because he didn't commit suicide. So notice how damage control, notice how they operate. If they get caught, oh, well, yeah, we should have taken that into consideration. They don't admit that murder was involved. They still cling to the phony suicide claim. They'll just say that, well, yeah, it turns out Gottlieb should have known that he was suicidal, and so, yeah, I guess he was wrong to not have taken that into consideration. Just like, with 9/11. Well, yeah, we did have some prior knowledge. We should have acted on it. Oh, give me a friggin' break. Anyway, the Congressional Committee investigating the CIA research, again, the Church Committee, concluded that, quote, prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of the subjects. The committee noted that the experiments, quote, sponsored by these researchers call into question the decision by the agencies not to fix guidelines for experiments. Documents show that the CIA participated in at least two of the DoD, Department of Defense, committees whose discussions in 1952 led up to the issuance of the memorandum by Secretary of Defense Wilson, which initiated the project. So, yeah, it was interconnected with the Defense Department. The same thing was done, for example, all during the 50s, 60s, 70s, with various chemical agents being released into, I think I did this show before, I'm not sure. I'll check later. If not, it'll be coming up at some point. But the CIA and the U.S. Army guys were going into subway systems in major cities around the country. And they have an agent hiding behind a ventilation, vent. And they would release various chemical agents. They'd have a little like those stink bomb type things, a little vial that they would throw it through the vent and it would smash, and upon being released, they would sit there behind the grate with a clipboard, little flashlight, and they would be taking notes, seeing how the public reacted as they walked by. Oh, they're sneezing. Oh, they're coughing. Oh, they're rubbing their eyes. And then later they would check with the local hospital's records to see who was checking in, and then, they would monitor to see if any of the people that inhaled, I should say, these toxins were actually showing up at the hospital. Countless thousands of people, guys, were exposed to poisons and in some cases deadly poisons. Several people did die from this. Some of them got what was it? Various infections anyway. Some of these mists contain bacterium, some got pneumonia, you name it. And, quite a few of them died at one hospital in Florida in particular, in Miami. I'm trying to think if I covered that or not. Maybe I didn't. That'll be a future show. But anyway, this was a joint project run by the CIA and the U.S. Army. Oh, there's been so many things like this. You know, there was a small town in Colorado that was selected back in the 70s. They flew some helicopters over and just doused the whole town with a pesticide. They were testing a pesticide. The government was involved with it, of course. You know, it was a private company that had produced it, probably a Lean Chew Pig company, and had your tax dollars paid to experiment, just dousing this small town, only a few hundred people. If the whole town gets wiped out, who cares? Let's see what happens. And so they monitored the town over the next several months, and sure enough, a lot of people got sick. Some of them died from ingesting this toxin. Oh, I guess we can't use that. You know, we'll have to try something else. Unbelievable. Look at the Tuskegee experiments. I mean, on and on it goes. On and on it goes. Makes you wonder what the hell they're doing now. Well, I mean, look at your chemtrails. That's not even an experiment. They're just dousing you with poisons, toxins, knowing the harmful effects of it, especially the neurological effects. They're not experimenting. They know it's going to have, you know, unhealthy effects on you. They want it. Anyway, following the recommendations of the Church Committee, President Gerald Ford in 1976 issued the first executive order on intelligence activities, which, among other things, prohibited experimentation with drugs on human subjects except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each such human subject, and in accordance with the guidelines issued by the National Commission. Well, you know, when you drive an already existing program deeper underground, you know, there's no way to check compliance of such a thing now, is there? Anyway, subsequent orders by Presidents Carter and Reagan expanded the directive to apply to any human experimentation. Again, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't stop them. Following on the heels of the revelations, you know, again, guys, this stuff is just done for public consumption, just for window dressing purposes. Following on the heels of the revelations about CIA experiments were similar stories about the Army, as I mentioned. In response, in 1975, the Secretary of the Army instructed the Army Inspector General to conduct an investigation. Don't you love it? When one federal agency investigates its own self, or even if it's another federal agency, it doesn't matter. They're all scratching each other's asses back and forth. But here you have the Army investigating its own self. Yeah. Among the findings of the Inspector General was the existence of the then still classified 1953 Wilson Memorandum. Excuse me. In response to the Inspector General's investigation, the memorandum was declassified in August of 1975. The Inspector General also found that the requirements of the 1953 memorandum had, at least in regards to Army drug testing, been essentially followed as written. The Army used only, quote, volunteers for its drug testing program, with one or two exceptions. You know, one of these, and I mentioned this in the show I was talking about, right after, or right during World War II, upon recruitment, at least 60,000, that's what's admitted anyway, at least 60,000 recruits in World War II were experimented on with chemical and biological agents. And yeah, it was voluntary. In fact, some of them, the risks were so serious that they told them they could opt out of service altogether if they would volunteer, you know, for such experiments. Anyway, it was voluntary, but they were told that they would be severely disciplined, face legal actions, whatnot, or if they still went into the Army, they would be court-martialed if they ever told their wives or anybody else about these experiments. Anyway, guys, a short break. Be right back. All right, guys, welcome back. Even though the Inspector General said that everything was being, quote, done above board, he also concluded that the volunteers were not fully informed as required prior to their participation. Sounds just like the CIA. Of course, they worked in tandem. And that the methods of procuring their services, in many cases, appeared not to have been in accord with the intent of Department of the Army's policies governing use of volunteers in research. So, you know, he admitted, you know, in a rather subtle way that, in other words, it wasn't actually quite so above board. You know, he had to please both sides, in other words. The ones that were complaining and the ones that wanted the whole thing covered up. He was, you know, riding both sides of the fence. Obviously, guys, the whole damn thing stunk to high heaven, just like the CIA's experiments. The Inspector General also noted that, quote, the evidence clearly reflected that every possible medical consideration was observed by the professional investigators at the medical research laboratories. Notice what that says, man. It's unbelievable. He's just saying that every possible medical consideration was observed. Yeah. And he wants you to conclude that, oh, we took everything into consideration and therefore we're very careful about what we expose the subjects to. No, he's not saying that. He's just saying it was observed. Well, of course. Just like any scientist will observe the effects of a torturous experiment he's inflicting on, you know, a helpless animal. That's what they were doing to these human beings as well. They were observing. Notice what he says, guys. It's unbelievable. He's trying to make this into a neutral statement, but he's actually admitting just exactly what they did. Subjected him to all kinds of chemical and physical tortures and just observed the effects. Yeah, that's what you do with any experiment. Unbelievable. Anyway, this conclusion, if accurate, is in striking contrast to what took place at the CIA. You know, again, guys, when you realize they worked in tandem very often on projects like this, they employed the same damn tactics. Give me a break. In Canada, the issue took much longer to surface, becoming widely known in 1984 on a CBC News show, The Fifth Estate. It was learned that not only had the CIA funded Cameron's efforts, but perhaps even more shockingly, the Canadian government was fully aware of this and had later provided another $500,000 in funding to continue the experiments. Disgusting. Anyway, guys, another break. Be right back. All right, folks, welcome back. I'm going to take a caller I got waiting in just a minute. Let me just mention a few more points here about what was going on up in Canada. It came out in 1984. This revelation largely derailed efforts by the victims to sue the CIA, as their U.S. counterparts had done. And the Canadian government eventually settled out of court for $100,000 to each of the 127 victims of Cameron's experiments. Here's an interesting admission made in the course of the 1975 congressional investigations, you know, the Church Committee. The CIA actually admitted that its MKUltra program, quote, considered various possible means for controlling human behavior, of which drugs were only one aspect, others being radiation, electroshock, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, anthropology, harassment substances, and paramilitary devices and materials. That's quite an admission. And again, guys, how much more do we not know? Anyway, let me go to our caller here. We got Tim in Wisconsin. How's it going, Tim?
Good. What you were telling about earlier in the first hour about what they did for treating anxiety attacks and whatever else in that order. What I had done to me wasn't as bad, but to me it felt bad enough, or was getting bad enough. Because see, at a time in the past I had panic attacks, and I feeling like need to do like even my grandma told me to do it, to check in a place called Norwood Health Center, and at least for a week, and besides how many medications.
When was this, Tim?
It was I'm trying to remember, somewhere in the late 90s, or not late 90s, somewhere after February of 1991.
So
it was somewhere in the year of 1991.
Yeah, and so what did they do? What kind of treatments?
I was going to say that besides however many other medications that they had me on, there's one time that they took me into this room and closed the door after they took me in the room, and then the thing I just remember is they they set me in a chair, and then they try another medication and another medication, and because it's the time I was having panic attacks bad enough, and then because of how the medication would end up making me feel, or medications end up making me feel, then I kind of starting to panic a bit because of that, and then and I can't remember everything I said, but after panicking a bit because of the way that one medication or so made me feel, then this doctor would say, oh, worry. I can see we're going to have to go for some more aggressive treatment. He actually said that, and then that started quite a scaring me. Him saying that like that. I can starting to think in my mind.
Never tried.
I can now starting to think. Oh no, what does that mean? What else is he thinking about doing?
They didn't do electro on you, did they? Supposedly.
No.
Yeah. They claim they stopped it, but it still does go on. They still do it. There's a facility. There's a facility in Rhode Island called Behavior Research Institute. As far as I know, they still do it. I know they were doing it as of 10 years ago. But they were using what's called negative reinforcement with, MR, mentally retarded, and autistic children. Negative reinforcement for negative behavior. They'd stick them in a cold shower. They'd make them eat their, least favorite food. Just literally torture the kids to try to induce more positive behaviors. It's psychopathic. Guys, once again, psychiatry, psychology. Where does it come from? It comes from elite Jew pigs. Anyway, was there anything else, Tim?
And then when I said about one of the things about the one or so medications that he was trying on me, when I said something about being afraid that like they were making me, like the medications were, made me feel like I was starting to lose my mind.
Yeah.
Then he says, well, we're trying to save your mind.
Yeah, they're trying to save it, all right. So, I mean...
I'm just laughing because of how you said that. You're trying to save it, all right.
Yeah. So anyway, but I mean, that was it. It was just medications. They didn't resort to any other type of treatments. Okay. No equipment was brought in. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. They don't even have to do lobotomies anymore like they used to. Actually sticking, ice picks under the eye socket. I mean, the medications they give you, chemical lobotomies they call them, and that's exactly what they are. So many people become vegetables. It's amazing, the same doctors that will tell you, don't take up drinking, don't take up, drugs. They'll turn around and give you stuff that has even far worse effect than drugs and the street drugs or the alcohol will do to you. Anyway, thanks for the call, Tim. All right, guys, let's move on here to talk about the General Accounting Office report. They also had looked into the MK Ultra program. And again, all you're going to get from agencies like this is just watered down. But nevertheless, interesting things have come out. Back in 2004, the GAO actually said that they believe that there's reason to be suspicious of the outcome of that election and that it calls for an investigation. Of course, they didn't launch one, neither did anybody else really, but the fact that they even said that was very interesting. So we'll talk about their assessment of MK Ultra when we get back, guys. Stick with us. The U.S. General Accounting Office, the GAO, issued a report on September 28, 1994. It sure took them long enough, didn't it? September 28, 1994, which stated that between 1940 and 1974, so now they took it back to the World War II era. Even before we got involved, they were doing this type of thing, folks. Even before the CIA existed. This is back in the days of the OSS. That from 1940 to 1974, DOD and other national security agencies studied thousands of human subjects in tests and experiments involving hazardous substances. Here's a revealing quote from this study. Working with the CIA, the Department of Defense gave hallucinogenic drugs to thousands of volunteer soldiers in the 1950s and 60s. In addition to LSD, the Army also tested quinylclinyl benzylate, a hallucinogenic codenamed BZ. Many of these tests were conducted under the so-called MK Ultra program, established to counter perceived Soviet and Chinese advances in brainwashing techniques. Yeah, perceived is the word there. Between 1953 and 64, the program consisted of 149 projects involving drug testing and other studies on unwitting human subjects. So there you go. Not very detailed, but revealing enough. I mean, there's no denying it, guys. And yet there's people today who will call you crazy and paranoid. Oh, they didn't do that. What are you talking about? Guys, this is freaking public record, for God's sakes. Anyway, the revelations about the CIA and the Army prompted a number of subjects or their survivors to file lawsuits against the federal government for conducting illegal experiments. Although the government aggressively and sometimes successfully sought to avoid legal liability, several plaintiffs did receive compensation through court order, out-of-court settlement, or acts of Congress. Frank Olson's family, for example, received $750,000 by a special act of Congress, and both President Ford and CIA Director William Colby met with Olson's family to publicly apologize. Like I said, guys, Colby is the only CIA director that I know of that had any degree of a conscience, and that's why, of course, they killed him back in 1996, his little alleged boating accident. Previously, the CIA and the Army had, and by the way, I mentioned, he helped John DeCamp research his Franklin cover-up book. Anyway, previously, the CIA and the Army had actively and successfully sought to withhold incriminating information, even as they secretly provided compensation to the families. Unbelievable. Denying with one hand and paying off hush money with the other. One subject of Army drug experimentation, James Stanley, an Army sergeant, brought an important, albeit unsuccessful, suit. The government argued that Stanley was barred from suing under a legal doctrine known as the Perez Doctrine, after a 1950 Supreme Court case, Perez versus United States, that prohibits members of the armed forces from from suing the government for any harms that were inflicted incident to service. In 1987, the Supreme Court affirmed this defense in a 5-4 decision that dismissed Stanley's case, unfortunately. 483 U.S. Code 669. Anyway, the majority argued that, quote, a test for liability that depends on the extent to which particular suits would call into question military discipline and decision-making would itself require judicial inquiry into, and hence intrusion upon, military matters. In other words, national security. In dissent, Justice William Brennan argued that the need to preserve military discipline should not protect the government from liability and punishment for serious violations of constitutional rights. Yeah, absolutely. Brennan, that must not be a Jew name. Anyway, here's what he said. The medical trials at Nuremberg in 1947 deeply impressed upon the world that experimentation, maybe he was a Jew, that experimentation with unknowing human subjects is morally and legally unacceptable. The United States Military Tribunal established the Nuremberg Code as a standard against which German scientists who experimented with human subjects. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, he must have been a Jew. In defiance of this principle, military intelligence officials began surreptitiously testing chemical and biological materials, he said, including LSD. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing a separate dissent, had this to say: no judicially crafted rule should insulate from liability the involuntary and unknowing human experimentation alleged to have occurred in this case. Indeed, as Justice Brennan observes, the United States played an instrumental role in the criminal prosecution of Nazi officials who experimented with... Notice, they gotta get that friggin' thing in there every frickin' time, don't they? Okay, well, we'll allow this window-dressing human rights declaration to go forward. It'll be good PR, and we can get a plug in there for the Holocaust. Or for Nuremberg, anyway, those horrible Nazis. Anyway, she went on to say, if this principle is violated, the very least that society can do is to see that the victims are compensated as best they can be by the perpetrators. Well, what do they care? That generates more loans from the Fed to make you pigs more rich. So, yeah, how much money you want? We'll write you a check. It's worthless paper currency anyway. Interest-bearing. Anyway, this is the only Supreme Court case to address the application of the Nuremberg Code to experimentation sponsored by the U.S. government. Only one on record. And while the suit was unsuccessful, dissenting opinions put the Army and, by association, the entire government on notice that use of individuals without their consent is unacceptable. So, again, now they just do it, outside the U.S. borders, in Guantanamo and other prisons overseas. Anyway, guys, another break. Pick up there when we get back. All right, guys, welcome back. There was another lawsuit that was filed by Wayne Ritchie, a former United States Marshal, who alleged that the CIA laced his food or drink with LSD at a 1957 Christmas party. While the government admitted that it was at that time drugging people without their knowledge or consent, U.S. District Judge Marilyn Hall Patel found Ritchie could not prove that he was one of the victims of MKUltra. She dismissed the case in 2005. Yeah. Probably paid off to do so. Anyway, we know of several applications that MKUltra was put to as far as assassinations go. Sirhan, the alleged assassin, and I do emphasize alleged, had nothing to do with it, guys. As the case was with his brother, the alleged assassin couldn't possibly have done it. For one thing, Oswald was a bad shot. He couldn't even see the limo from the angle where the car was. There was a big oak tree in the way. That whole gamut. And then, when it comes to RFK, the same thing. I don't think I did a show on him yet. I'll be doing that at some point. Or maybe I did. I can't remember. I don't think I did. But anyway, RFK's assassination, the same damn thing. He was supposed to have been shot from the front because Sirhan was in front of him. But the deadly shot actually came from behind, at close range. Somebody standing right behind him shot him. Sirhan has been subjected to all kinds of tests, put under hypnosis, you name it. And everyone that's looked at him, every independent investigator and doctor, that is, has said the same thing, that he exhibits all the classic symptoms of an MKUltra mind control victim. He has no recollection whatsoever. Under hypnosis, he could not recall at all what went on in the hotel that day. He has no memory of it. He was obviously, in one of his alternate personalities at the time. He was told just to be there and fire his gun indiscriminately, randomly, or at the ceiling. He did fire at least some of the shots at the ceiling. There were bullet holes found in the ceiling. Anyway, there's been, all other kinds of instances. Believe it or not, the Jim Jones case. I'll have a whole show I'll be doing on that. But, the Jonestown fiasco, guys, was an extension of MKUltra, which was supposedly defunct at the time. Of course it wasn't. But after Leo Ryan was murdered at Jonestown by, cult followers, his children filed a lawsuit claiming that the CIA had been operating Jonestown as part of their MKUltra program, and that Richard Dwyer, the deputy chief of mission from the U.S. Embassy, who had organized the trip on Ryan's behalf, was a CIA agent. He was the congressman that went down there, and him and his whole entourage was murdered. They were shot as they were trying to board the planes to come back to the U.S. The lawsuit was dismissed for reasons that have never been made public, and of course never will. And the majority of U.S. government records concerning Jonestown remain sealed to this day. Oh, not because there's anything to hide, of course. That was, without question, an MK Ultra program, guys. A lot of the drugs that were found in the locker there were the ones used, in MK Ultra mind control experiments. And there's CIA fingerprints all the hell over that damn thing. Like I said, though, that'll be another whole show in and of itself. But let us now take a look at some very interesting, very revealing personal testimonies of victims of MK Ultra. These were presented before the President's Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments in March of 1995. I get this is what did I say before? 96, 97. It was 95 when Bill Clinton made that admission. He said it was unethical then, and it's unethical now. We were wrong, and we apologize. And, he admitted that this was being done. I mean, again, how people don't know or how people can deny that this stuff went on is just absolutely mind-blowing, because Clinton himself admitted, yes, this was done. 100,000 people at least were victims just of the radiation aspect of these experiments. Anyway, Chris Denicola, a woman, gave this testimony. I'm Chris Denicola, born July 1962. I was a subject in radiation as well as in mind control experiments performed by a man I know as Dr. Green. My parents were divorced around 1966, if that was in fact his real name, Dr. Green. Yeah, what kind of name do you think that is, folks? My father was involved with Dr. Green in the experiments. I was a subject from 1966 to 1976. Dr. Green performed radiation experiments on me in 1970, focusing on my neck, throat, and chest in 1970, and on my uterus in 1975. Each time I became dizzy, nauseous, and threw up. All these experiments were performed on me in conjunction with mind control techniques and drugs in Tucson, Arizona. And if I remember right, it's been a while since I read this, but I do believe this gets rather disgustingly graphic. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to read it, but in any case, if you get kids in the room, you might not want to have them around to hear this. She went on to say, Dr. Green was using me mostly as a mind control subject. His objective was to gain control of my mind and train me to be a spy assassin. The first significant memory took place at Kansas City University in 1966. Dr. Ebner took me there by plane when my mom was out of town. I was in what looked like a laboratory, and there seemed to be other children. I was strapped down naked, spread eagle on a table on my back. Dr. Green had electrodes on my body, including my head. He used what looked like an overhead projector and repeatedly said that he was burning different images into my brain while a red light flashed, aimed at my forehead. In between each sequence, he used electric shock on my body and told me to go deeper and deeper, while he repeated that each image would go deeper and deeper into my brain. Unfrickin' believable, man. Oh, I tell you, I'd love the privilege of beating the shit out of a bastard like this. I would do whatever he told me to do. I felt drugged because he had given me a shot before each procedure. When it was over, he gave me another shot. The next thing I remember, I was with my grandparents again in Tucson, Arizona. I was 4 years freaking old. 4 freaking years old. Full consent of her parents and apparently grandparents as well, folks. She went on to say, you can see from this experiment that Dr. Green used trauma, drugs, post-hypnotic suggestion, and more trauma in an effort to gain total control of my mind. He used me in radiation experiments both for the purpose of determining the effects of radiation on various parts of my body and to terrorize me as an additional trauma in the mind control experiments. The rest of these experiments took place in Tucson, Arizona, out in the desert. I was taught how to pick locks, be secretive, use my photographic memory, and a technique to withhold information by repeating numbers to myself. Pick up there when we get back, guys. It just gets thicker and thicker. Stick with us. All right, guys. Continuing with this congressional testimony here. She went on to say, Dr. Green moved on to wanting me to kill dolls that looked like real children. Now, what does this sound like, ladies and gentlemen? This is what they do in satanic occult rituals. They get kids to start off with anyway. They get them to kill dolls. Then they move up from there to animals and ultimately other children. And here you have this being done by a doctor, a scientist, working for the CIA. Isn't that interesting? And are you surprised to find out that the CIA has been working and still works, has always worked in tandem with Satanist groups? You know, I cited several documents, yesterday, along that line. There's been many others over the years that have come out showing clear, indisputable connections between Satanist groups and the CIA, of course. They love to engage in the same types of activities. They have the same mindset. So, of course, they're going to cooperate with each other. Yeah, hey, you got any children for us? Or do you need some children? We got some for you if you need them. Unbelievable. Yeah, we need a couple traumatized children for the... Anyway, she goes on, I stabbed a doll with a spear once after being severely traumatized, but the next time I refused. He used many pain induction techniques, but as I got older, I resisted more and more. He often tied me down in a cage, which was near his office. Anyway... And then she describes how, sometimes they were careless. They left the cage unlocked when they would leave. And how she would sneak out of the cage and go into the office and look around. And she would see papers on the desk that had, CIA or, U.S. Department of Defense, on the letterhead. So, she knew that this was official government business. Anyway... Let's look at another testimony given at these hearings back in 1995. This one by victim Claudia Mullen. She said, between the years of 1957 and 1984, I became a pawn in the government's scheme. The goal was mind control and to create the perfect spy. It involved the use of chemicals, radiation, drugs, hypnosis, electric shock, isolation, drops of water, Chinese water torture, sleep deprivation, brainwashing, verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. I was exploited unwillingly for nearly 3 decades of my life, and the only explanation given to me was that the end justifies the means, and I was told that I was serving my country in a bold effort to fight communism. I can only summarize my circumstances by saying that they took an already abused 7-year-old child and compounded my suffering beyond belief. Oh, they love to do that. They love to get children that already had a background of abuse. They've already been mentally conditioned. The saddest part, she says, is that I know for a fact that I was not alone. there were countless other children in my same situation, and there was no one to help us until now. Dr. L. Wilson Green. There you go. She gave the full name. Elite Jew Pig, of course. What else could it be with a name like Green? Dr. L. Wilson Green, who claimed to have received $50 million from the Edgewood Chemical Biological Laboratory as part of a technical science division of the CIA, once described to Dr. Charles Brown that, quote, children were used as subjects because they were more fun to work with and cheaper as well. They needed lower profile subjects than government people, so only young females would do. Besides, I love scaring them, he said. They and the agency think I am a god. This is the, Green talking. They think I'm a god creating subject experiments for whatever purposes Sid, that's Gottlieb, and James can think up. James was James Hamilton. That's probably an elite Jew pig name, too. Anyway, in 1958, she said, I was to be tested. I was told by some important doctors from the Human Ecology Society, and I was instructed to cooperate. I was told not to look at anyone's faces and try hard to ignore any names, and this was a very secret project. Naturally, as most children do, I did the opposite and remembered as much as I could. Dr. John Gittinger, yeah, I'd say that's a Jew, tested me. Dr. Cameron gave me the shocks, and Dr. Green the x-rays. Then, so she was apparently brought up to Canada. Cameron was involved in some of this. Then I was told by Sid Gottlieb that I was right for the big A, meaning artichoke. By the time I left to go home, just like every time from then on, I would remember only whatever explanations Dr. Robert G. Heath, yeah, I'd call him a Jew too, gave me for the old bruises, nail marks, burns on my head, fingers, and even the genital soreness. So, he would give her fake excuses that she was to use to explain these bruises if anyone saw them and asked. I had no reason to believe otherwise. They had already begun to control my mind. The next year, I was sent to a lodge in Maryland to learn how to sexually please men. I was told how to coerce them into talking about themselves. So they used her for many purposes, guys. One of them was as a sex slave. A lot of these people were brought to Bohemian Grove, as it turns out. She said, I was used to entrap many unwilling men, all with the use of a hidden camera. So, here you have Franklin-type things going on. They would use this for blackmail of politicians and whatnot. I was only 9 years old when this sexual humiliation began. As a result of all this, I have been robbed of the ability to work and even to bear any children of my own. It is blatantly obvious that none of this was needed and should have never been allowed to take place at all. Yeah, precisely. Let's take a look. I got a few more minutes here. Or do we? Wait a minute. Well, no. Well, yeah, I guess we got a couple of minutes. We'll see what I can cover, and then I'll finish this up tomorrow. I only got a couple more pages left. And then I'll be off onto another related topic. Sub-Project 94, it's called. Around 1960, Gottlieb expanded the MK Ultra program to include mind control experiments with animals. In Operation Resurrection, apes were lobotomized, then placed in total isolation. After a time, the experimenters would direct radio frequencies into the brains of the apes, who immediately went mad and died, their brains literally fried. You know, they did this with an elephant once, the San Diego Zoo. They gave the elephant an exorbitant amount of LSD, and in no time at all, the thing went mad and keeled over and died. Well, you know, if they can do stuff like this to humans, I'm so surprised to do it to animals, too. What a bunch of sick bastards. All right, guys, that's it for today. I'll finish this up tomorrow. Like I said, I'll go off onto something else related to this. Okay, have a great day. We'll catch you then. Take care. All right, everybody. Happy Friday at the end of another week here. Gonna pick up, finish up with the discussion here on MK Ultra. And really, this is just an introduction to the topic. In fact, I'm going to follow this up. I might even start it today. I got a guest second hour, but I've only got a couple more pages left of this, so I'll finish this up, I'm sure, first hour, and then I'm going to follow it up with a discussion of a sub-program, sub-unit of MK Ultra, Project Monarch, a very specific mind control program that was focused on trauma-based mind control tactics. And then I'm going to follow that up with a discussion on the application of that type of mind control program on Hollywooders. Many performers over the years, actors, musicians, and whatnot, have been obvious monarch victims. We'll look at some of the classic symptoms of it. There's even been some videos that depict monarch themes, not just themes, but actual dramatization of some of their experiences. We'll get into that later. You know, that won't be obviously till next week. Very bizarre stuff. Very sick stuff. In fact, I got a multitude of shows on Hollywood. I don't know if I'm going to do them all together or spread them out or whatever, but a lot of interesting admissions have been made over the years about, you know, experiences not only like that, but discussions of rampant pedophilia in Hollywood. You know, actors coming forward over the years. It was a confession made just a couple months ago along that line. And, you know, even Jewish actors being molested and abused by their Jewish producers. They don't just go after Gentiles, folks. They go after their own as well. But it's pervasive, absolutely pervasive in Hollywood. Everybody's heard about the casting couch and how, young, beautiful women, or young, handsome men for that matter, don't get into the acting business unless they take their pants off. Well, it works with kids too. And, there's been admissions as well over the years about strange deaths in Hollywood not being accidental or suicidal as they have been claimed to be. That's just a sampling of some of the stuff we'll be dealing with. Well, what do you expect when Hollywood is run by Arabs? Of course you're going to get that kind of corruption. All right, guys, short break, be right back. I tell you guys, when you look at things like, the Franklin cover-up, the Kinsey reports, what we're looking at now, MK Ultra, when you see what psychopaths these bastards are at the highest levels in government, in the medical profession, the psychiatry profession, at the top, when you see how absolutely evil these people are, nothing shocks you anymore. Nothing surprises you anymore. And, when you hear about this, that, or the other being a quote, inside job, or an outside job involving Israel, whatever, nothing surprises you. In fact, every time something happens, that's your first thought. Oh, here they go again. How people could ever think, oh, they wouldn't do that. Oh, how could you say that? They're either completely ignorant of just how evil these bastards are, or they're shillers. By the way, I was just looking at some of the comments in the chat room yesterday after I had logged off, and I didn't notice before I had logged off, but somebody was commenting on one of the testimonies that I was reading from yesterday before the congressional hearing back in 1995, and they're saying, this is BS. How could that woman have known that she was going to be used for to be an assassin or whatever. First of all, I guess they weren't paying attention. One of them mentioned how, they would keep her in a cage, but on occasion, they wouldn't lock it. Of course, they probably didn't care because the office itself, or the lab itself, was locked. And so, she mentioned how on occasion she would, she was able to get out of the cage, went into one of the offices and puttered around and looked through some of the paperwork, and she saw, CIA or Department of Defense, so she knew that she was a part of some governmental experiment program. And she knew her father was involved with the federal government, with the CIA. But also, a lot of this came out over time by going to, a psychiatrist that wasn't tied in with the system. A lot of them were put under hypnosis, and so a lot of this information came out later. There are several, psychiatrists/psychologists around the country who have worked with people like this, who are aware of this, know what signs to look for, and are able to help people, get over abuse from, specifically from MK Ultra type mind control programs. In fact, I should get, what's his name, Colin Ross on. I interviewed him years ago. He's well aware of this stuff and has worked with patients, that have been through programs like this. Anyway, I left off yesterday talking about this program involving experimenting with animals, gorillas that give them mind-expanding drugs, LSD or whatever, and a lot of them, just flipped out, went nuts, and wound up dying. They did this with elephants. Gave an elephant an exorbitant amount of LSD. And they figured, well, an elephant is much bigger than a human, so we'll give them a much bigger dose than what we'd ordinarily give a human. And, unbelievably, they murdered the elephant. The elephant just went mad, started running around, pounding its feet on the ground and trumpeting with its horn and with its nose, its trunk, and keeled over right there on the spot. So anyway, additional experiments along this line were conducted with dogs, cats, monkeys, you name it, in which miniaturized electrode implants were inserted into specific brain areas. And again, they did this kind of stuff with humans as well, guys. Like I was mentioning yesterday, that you'd come in for, let's say a brain tumor or something, and while they're taking the tumor out, they'd be putting an electrode in your brain, and you wouldn't even know that they would be tampering with you remotely, sending signals, alpha and beta wave signals or whatever, and the transmitter would pick them up, and they would be transmitting messages into your brain. You wouldn't hear them audibly with your ears. You would hear them internally. Makes you wonder now, over the years, you hear of murderers saying that God told me to do it. Oh, no doubt. There are psychoses where people do hear, voices in their head, but you gotta wonder how many of these people might have actually been victims of this program and really did hear something in their head. And, mistook it as God. If you've ever seen, come out last year, Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory show there, where, who is it, Baggage, has him, he conducts an experiment on him with, a small-scale machine like that. He sends signals right into, Ventura's head, and sure enough, Ventura's like, wow, I hear it in my head, not with my ears. I can actually hear it inside my head, demonstrating how the technology works. This has been around for a long time, and it's an outgrowth of MK Ultra. Anyway, some tests also along this line were designed to see how physical actions might be stimulated or controlled electronically. Literally to remote control people, to see if you could turn people into, automatons. Press this button, he moves his right arm. Press that one, he moves his left. The ultimate desire, the ultimate goal of a tyrant, to be able to puppeteer people to the point where you can have complete control over everything they do, everything they say. That was one of the goals of this particular project, this sub-project. In certain instances, the animals that were experimented on were living bombs guided toward their targets by electrode implants and miniaturized microphones giving commands, remote prompts, and once they reached the target or the close enough area to the target, they would remotely set off the explosives that they had implanted in them. Bunch of psychos. Gee, it makes you wonder, huh? About these alleged Palestinian terrorist attacks with the bombs strapped on them, if there's even any truth to any of those claims. But if there is, the Mossad isn't going to volunteer for something like that. Makes you wonder, guys. Do they have a little electrode? Are they being... are they drugged up? Are they in one of these induced states, altered states? One of their alternate personalities? I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I'd bet my life on it. Anyway, guys, if they are, in fact, Palestinians doing these things. Short break, guys. Be right back. So anyway, guys, by April of 1961, Gottlieb, the psychopathic Jew pig nutbag, MK Ultra scientist, the doctor, assessed the animal experiments that I was just mentioning as successful and decided that it was time to experiment with electrode implants in human brains. We'll start with the animals first. If we show any signs of success, then we can start using, that was, of course, the ultimate goal. And so they started experimenting with humans. Unbelievable. No records, of course, exist to disclose how many cruel experiments of this nature were actually conducted with unwilling human subjects. We know they were because he gave approval for it. In 1972, Richard Helms, director of the CIA at the time, ordered records of all 150 individual projects of MKUltra destroyed, as I mentioned yesterday. But information had leaked out concerning experiments with 3 Viet Cong prisoners in July of 1968. So, like I said, a lot of times to avoid, trouble if the word ever leaked out, they would do some of this stuff, the really sinister stuff, overseas. They had Cameron doing stuff up in Canada. And, another purpose for Vietnam was to recruit subjects, or should I say victims, for experiments like this. And they figured, hey, if it ever gets found out, who's going to complain? It was those evil Vietnamese people we were fighting against, the Viet Cong, the North Viet Cong. No one will complain about that. A lot of the victims were prisoners. No one's going to complain about that. Anyway, a team of so-called behaviorists flew into Saigon, according to this information that had leaked out, and traveled to the hospital, or maybe they wanted this leaked out, I'm sure they did. We'll cover everything up we did here on American soil, as though we didn't experiment on Americans. We'll just let this stuff leak out. That way we can condition them at least to accepting experimentation with humans. That would be typical of them, guys, We'll admit that we're experimenting with humans, but it'll be ones that probably no one will care about. It'll be the Viet Cong, But nevertheless, it's getting used to the idea of them using humans, and then over time, when you get numbed up to that, then they'll bring it closer and closer to home. Anyway, as I said, a team of behaviorists flew into Saigon and traveled to the hospital at Bien Hoa, where the prisoners were being confined. The agents from Sub-Project 94, as it was called, had set up their equipment in an enclosed compound, and the team's neurosurgeon and neurologist inserted minuscule electrodes into the brains of the 3 Viet Cong prisoners. This is sick stuff. After a brief recovery period, after the surgery, the prisoners were armed with knives, and direct electrical stimulation was applied to their brains through the electrodes, the implants. The goal of the experiment was to determine if individuals with such electrodes implanted in their brains could be incited to attack and kill one another. Can you freaking believe this, guys? Oh, what a bunch of sick bastards. And your tax dollars that they illegally extorted out of your check every week paid for this. Once again, the agency was seeking a perfect sleeper assassin, one that could be called upon at any given moment when needed, a true Manchurian candidate who could be electrically directed to kill a subject. And of course, they used all kinds of different methods. This was just one. I think ultimately they decided to go with the trauma-induced bipolar disorder creation, through trauma. That seems to have been the preference of all the different techniques. That seemed to have been the one that was most promising, that could be relied upon most consistently. Anyway, after a week of enduring electrical shocks to their brains, these particular prisoners, the Viet Cong prisoners, still refused to attack one another. The results were disappointing. So they were summarily executed, and their bodies were burned. Unfriggin' believable. Unbelievable, guys. Oh, but that's nothing. Wait till I do my show on the, what the heck was it? Shoot. I forget now the name of the village. There was one particular village where, the CIA was training troops to go in and rape and they did. Oh, My Lai, that's it. Yeah, the My Lai massacre. Some of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with that. If not, look that up. M-Y and then L-A-I, two separate words. The My Lai massacre. Absolutely disgusting. Like I said, once you catch a glimpse of programs like this and see just how sick, how sinister these bastards are, nothing shocks you anymore. Nothing surprises you. You hear of 9/11 being an inside job. It's like, it's a given. Yeah, of course they have the mentality to do something like that. They've been doing sick, psychopathic stuff like that for a long time now. They don't give a damn, ladies and gentlemen, how many innocent people suffer and die, especially when you realize you pigs run the whole thing. You know they get off on that, if you're even mildly familiar with how those bastards operate. This is just a continuation of stuff that they've been doing for thousands of years. You go back to the Inquisition, and you realize that whole damn thing was let out by Torquemada the Jew. It's no surprise that you're seeing torture being used now in the War on Terror. Who's running that? Who created that? Our neocon elite Jew pig buddies, guys. They're bringing back something they had successfully been using for hundreds and indeed thousands of years. It's the same old thing, run by the same people. Anyway, over 2 million Americans, and that's probably on the conservative end of the estimate, at least 2 million Americans have been programmed by trauma-based mind control since 1947, and the CIA admitted that its mind control, it confessed that it had, that this went on, this mind control program. It admitted it publicly. Its own documents attest to it, the few they didn't destroy. Yet the reality of such mind control experiments is still unknown to the general public for the most part. It's unbelievable. This information came out decades ago. It was made known publicly, and, you mentioned MK Ultra. It's unbelievable. You go to an average cookout or something, can you believe what the government did in that MK Ultra program? And they look at you like, huh? They can tell you who's having an affair in the soap opera or in Hollywood or what the ball game score is. But MK Ultra, huh? Be right back, guys. All right, everybody, welcome back. So, it's because of things like MK Ultra that the House Intelligence Committee reported back in 1996, and I quote, "The CS, or clandestine service of the CIA, is the only part of the IC, or intelligence community, indeed of the government as a whole, where hundreds of employees on a daily basis are directed to break extremely serious laws in countries around the world," including the U.S., of course. It goes on to say, "A safe estimate is that several hundred times every day, DO, or Directorate of Operations, officers engage in highly illegal activities." Did you catch that? Once again, guys, when you have a congressional admission like that, as sleazy as Congress is, for them to make an admission like that, it's friggin' bad. You can expect the worst of the worst. So is it any surprise that we discover that the CIA has been involved with satanic groups, that it's been involved with child abductions and pedophile rings and on and on and on, drug trafficking, and nothing should shock you. The CIA is crime central, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing good has ever come out of this agency. Its sole purpose is to engage in the most horrific freaking crimes and then have their buddies at the FBI come along and cover their asses. That's all that we've ever gotten from them. That's all we ever will get until the bitch is finally shut down. That and a whole lot of other disgusting, filthy pig alphabet agencies like it. But let me read that quote again. Listen to this. The CS, clandestine service of the CIA, is the only part of the intelligence community, indeed of the government, where hundreds of employees on a daily basis, well, they're wrong about that. It's not the only part of the government, but nevertheless, a lot of government agencies operate this way, for crying out loud. But nevertheless, where hundreds of employees on a daily basis are directed to break extremely serious laws in countries around the world, yeah, including the U.S., a safe estimate is that several hundred times every day, Directorate of Operations officers engage in highly illegal activities. So, take quotes like this and shove it up the hindparts of those who say, oh, no, they wouldn't do that. It's admitted that they do this. Of course they do. Then you get people who will, admit, oh, yeah, I know about that. Yeah, the CIA. Yeah. But then you mention, well, did you know that they're involved in pedophile rings and that they use these kids to blackmail politicians? They actually use them in snuff films? How dare you? How could you say anything like that? The damn quote admits that they're engaged in highly illegal activities. Anyway, it needs to be pointed out that Dr. L. Wilson Green, well, I already mentioned this, but, let's review this again. These are the top scientists with MKUltra. Dr. L. Wilson Green, and his real name is Grousbaum or something like that. I'll be coming back to him when I discuss Monarch next week. But Dr. Green, as he's commonly known by his victims, Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. These are the big three in MKUltra. All of them were elite Jew pigs. Are you surprised, ladies and gentlemen? Like I say, pick any major whopping crime, not only of today, not only of the past several decades, but for the past 3,000 years in any country that you choose to pick. And you will see a Jew enthroned at the top rungs of the ladder of that crime syndicate every single friggin' time. Every single friggin' time. There's no exception. Funny, how we always hear so much about the evil Nazi Dr. Mengele and the horrible experiments that he's alleged to have performed on humans. But you never hear mention made of these Jewish monstrosities from the MKUltra program, for example. You never hear about them and their human experimentation programs. Former CIA scientist George Hunter White wrote thusly of his MKUltra escapades. He had worked for MKUltra. And here's what he wrote in a letter to Mr. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Listen to what he said. This is so revealing. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards, meaning working for the program, the MKUltra. I toiled wholeheartedly, he said. In other words, I enjoyed it. I indulged in this work. I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest, meaning the government? Can you believe this, guys? George Hunter White, how much you want to bet upon closer inspection that he's a elite Jew pig, too? If anybody has any data on that, let me know. I haven't looked into him, but to have made a statement like that, I'd bet my life on it. Who else would talk like this, guys? I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards of MKUltra because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy, yeah, I'm sure you're a red-blooded American, where else could one lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing? Do you see, guys, the kind of mentality these bastards have? These are PhD-endowed experts in their fields that took part in these things. And they did it not just because there was big fat wads of cash waiting for them at the end of the week, but they did it because they personally got their rocks off on it. They enjoyed it. Who, throughout the past 3,000 years of human history, has had that kind of mentality more than anybody else? What group do you find that kind of mentality instilled in on a whopping scale? It's Jews, ladies and gentlemen. Again, not all Jews are like that, but a good many of them are, aren't they? Certainly. The elite ones. Oh, yes. They love it because it's part of their Talmudic war on the Gentiles. To them, raping and killing and stealing and cheating and pillaging is fun, fun, fun. And notice, he's writing to a Jew, Gottlieb, one of the top scientists in the MK Ultra program. So naturally, he too found it fun, fun, fun. Oh, it's amazing. But, you know, there's a lot of people out there, a lot of books out there, you know, talking about the evils of MK Ultra, and that's all fine and dandy. But, you know, they never bring in the Jew factor, guys, just like Franklin cover-up. Some great work has been done on this, and that's good. They don't mention the Jew factor. A lot of good books out there on the Federal Reserve. And they're all good, you know, exposing their crimes and the scam of their monetary system that they've imposed on us, blah, blah, blah. But again, almost none of them mention the Jew factor. You know, look at my guest the other day, Miss Ellen Brown. I don't know, man. I just don't know how you can study into something like that so closely. And you just, how do you miss that? I mean, how can you miss it? It's got hoof prints all over the damn thing from day one. I found it interesting that she was trying to finger Theodore Roosevelt as the one who got the whole thing going. I mean, I'm not exonerating him. He was an elite Jew pig scumball himself, but, you know, he did not implement it, guys. It was, but nevertheless, I find that interesting because, for someone that likes to defend Jews so much, if she wants to, you know, pin that on him, he was a Jew himself. Anyway, guys, short break. Stick with us. Be right back. Obviously, I'm not going to get to my discussion on Monarch, Project Monarch until Monday, but that's the logical follow-up with the MK Ultra discussion. You don't want to miss that, folks. And then that will set the stage for my Hollywood, or one of my Hollywood discussions. A lot of Hollywooders, guys, have been monarched. And that's why, as I'll demonstrate next week, you see butterfly symbols all over the place. The motif of mirror imaging, you know, like, what was that show my daughter used to watch, that stupid thing? Hannah Montana. This idea of twinning. That's another motif that you'll see a lot in Hollywood, you know, with actors, with musicians. Album covers where the musician is looking in the mirror. And, you know, they're sending a message with this mirror image thing. It has to do with split personalities. Anyway, we'll talk about that next week. All right, guys, that's it for today. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday. Take care.